It's the National Quilts of Valor Sew Day, a time when quilters across the country join efforts to make blocks and finished quilts for our deserving veterans, anyone touched by war. You can find out more about the Quilts of Valor Foundation at the link in the description below. They are one of my favorite quilting charities. And in today's show, I'm going to share a tutorial for the 2024 Quilts of Valor block and give you a behind-the-scenes look at the sewing day in my local area. Let's get started. The cutting instructions for this year's block work with the Accuquilt system. So I am going to use my dies. The center block for our Ohio Star is a 4-inch square. So I just cut that out with seam allowances using my regular rulers. I don't need a template for that. But the 1/4 square triangles are going to come together so nicely with this die for my Accuquilt GO. So I made sure I had a piece of fabric that I'm just folding in half so that I get 8 pieces that I need from my red fabric. And then I can layer a piece of white fabric. Same thing. I cut it as wide as my die and folded it so it has 2 layers, and then we can put the mat on top of that and run it through the Accuquilt die cutter. And now, get rid of the static, I have all the pieces that I need for my red and white 1/4 square triangles. So I can set those aside and take those to my sewing machine. I can use the same mat, and then I will grab my 1/2 square triangle die. And the same thing, I took my fabric scraps and cut them to the width of the die, and then I can fold them in half and place them on top of that surface. Again, I need 2 layers of each fabric for 1 block. So I'm going to lay that down and run it through the machine again. And just that fast, I have all of my triangles cut for both my 1/2 square triangles and my 1/4 square triangles. So then we can move to the sewing machine. I have all my components set out near my machine so that I can do some easy chain piecing. I'm going to start with the half sections of my 1/4 square triangle, and I need to sew along this short edge. And we need to be pretty careful with our fabrics because those are bias edges. And we will just sew with each piece is going to be fed underneath the machine in the same way. So I'll make sure I have that white fabric on top, positioned with that right angle under the machine. Grab my next set. And this is chain piecing when I am feeding all of the pieces underneath my machine without cutting the threads. I'm going to get one long chain of triangles sewn together. And you can see that the Accuquilt die has already cut off our dog ears. So if I am careful lining those pieces up, then they should come out to exactly the size that I need for the next step. And then I can grab my half square triangles and line those up carefully. And this time I'm sewing on the long diagonal edge. And my sewing machine doesn't like to grab those triangle pieces, corners very well. So you kind of have to give it a little tug and get it going. So I will raise my presser foot and line up the fabric and see if I have a better start with the presser foot up. Now there are many methods to make half square triangles. So if you cut your pieces a little bit larger, you can do the 2 at a time method. But with the ease of my Accuquilt die cutting, it's easier to just get all the triangles cut first rather than second. With the 2 at a time method, you're sewing your seam first and then cutting them apart. With the Accuquilt, I'm cutting first and then sewing to the seam. And then I can find my chain of my 1/4 square triangles. Here we are. And I'm going to bring in my little BladeSaver trimmer, and I've got an old rotary cutter blade in there, and that just lets me trim apart these chains really quickly and easily. And I am going to cheat just a little bit, and I am going to finger press these seams to the red fabric. So I'm just going to turn my pile over there and finger press all of these, and then I'll be able to join pairs for the 1/4 square triangle. And I don't even need to finger press the whole seam. I can just do this edge that I'm going to be sewing, and then I can take the whole unit to the iron once I'm done getting these units together. The philosophy for finger pressing in between is that you have a greater chance to distort the fabric with your iron. So if you wait to iron until you have the whole block or the major components done rather than every little piece, then it will come together a little easier. And I am just holding that seam in place where I have nested those rather than pinning. We'll cross our fingers that I don't lose too much accuracy there. But these are kind of long seams. I can do 2.5 inch units together without seams, but if I get bigger than that, and these are 4.5, so I will give myself that added security and pin those intersections. And there it tried to eat the fabric again, so I'm just going to put some tension on that back piece and get that fabric moving underneath the needle. And I was starting with my scissors, and I remember I have my handy tool here. So I've got my half square triangles ready, and my quarter square triangles ready. So let me go ahead and take these to the iron, and then we will be right back to sew the full block together. I like to lay out my blocks before I sew them. So our red square is going in the middle, and these blue half square triangles are going to be the corners as kind of a frame. And then we have our quarter square triangles become the star points for our Ohio star. And I'm going to sew this as a 9 patch, and so I will have my 3 rows that go together to make the final block. So again, I don't need to pin, but if that makes you feel more secure, you can. I've just lined those diagonal seams up, and I can start sewing. And then I grab my top pair that becomes the top row, and this time the seams don't nest, they're gonna lay right on top of each other. For my middle row, I want to remember that the red fabric touches the white fabric. And I have my 3 rows, and I'm going to remember the pressing for a 9 patch. This top row is going to go out towards the blue, and this center row will go in towards the red. So let me get those ironed, and then we can come back and sew the rows together. For this row, I do want to pin, so I am going to line that seam up and make sure that those are nested. Make sure my pins are lined up right on the seam line there. And there is our patriotic Ohio star for the 2024 Quilts of Valor block drive. Thanks for sewing along with me. If you'd like to see more charitable quilts and a huge variety of organizations that you can support with your quilting efforts, check out this video next. And please leave a comment telling me about your charity sewing. I'd love to hear all about it.